offered by the gentleman from Indiana will be postponed. It is now in order to consider amendment number 64, printed at House Report 118-142. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 64, printed in House Report number 118-142, offered by Mr. Roy of Texas.
Pursuant to House Resolution 583, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Roy, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Roy.
I thank the chair. We have spent the better part of the last several days making clear to the American people that this side of the aisle wants to see a Defense Department that is focused on its core mission, defending the United States of America, rather than divvying us up by race and dividing us and separating us. I rise today to ensure that the Department of Defense is focused on its core mission rather than pursuing the political agenda of climate change to the detriment of the national security of the United States. In 2021, Department of Defense spokesman John Kirby refused to say that China is a bigger national security threat to the United States than climate change. He called them, quote, equally important, and said it doesn't do any good to make a relative, quote unquote, assessment of national security issues. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin has said climate change is an existential threat to our nation's security. Next week, Secretary of State John Kerry literally travels to China to discuss climate change, not China's increased aggression against Taiwan, not its expansion in the Pacific, not its oppression of its people, not the fact that they produce 2 new coal-fired plants per week on top of the 1,100 they have, while we undermine our national security to pursue the climate fetish agenda of the other side of the aisle. President Biden's executive orders have served as the catalyst for massive reforms at the Department of Defense that compromise national security to advance this climate fetish. The amendment that I offer would prohibit any of the funding in the National Defense Authorization Act, or that flows from that authorization, from being used to carry out President Biden's executive orders on climate change. The Department of Defense's Climate Adaptation Plan includes radical proposals to reduce greenhouse gas emissions at the expense of our warfighting capabilities. According to the plan, DoD has identified climate change as, quote, a critical national security issue. It mandates, quote, environmental justice, because why miss an opportunity to push divisive ideology? The DoD says it will transition to 100% carbon-free electricity, meaning America's war machine will literally depend on the wind and the sun. No one, including anyone on this side of the aisle, believes that we shouldn't pursue every advantage in technology to harness energy. No one. In Texas, we've embraced wind, we've embraced solar. But to our detriment, when we have interfered with the market and interfered with the ability of us to have energy at our disposal and at our demand. We undermine our grid. We undermine our national security. We undermine reliability. We cause energy prices to go up. And in this case, in the context of the National Defense Authorization Act, we should not be pursuing this politically motivated climate fetishization that undermines our national security. I reserve.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Washington seek recognition?
I rise to claim the time in opposition.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you. I yield myself such time as I may consume. I'm just going to make 3 quick points here. First of all, it's interesting. You can go back to 2008 and look at John McCain's campaign and even entertainingly Sarah Palin's vice presidential statements about how climate change was an existential threat. And this was a bipartisan issue where we talked about why this was a significant challenge that we needed to address. Well, then, of course, Barack Obama had the audacity to get elected president and pursue that agenda, so suddenly it became political. And I just want to make this very, very clear, that the belief here is that digging up fossil fuels from below the ground and burning them is bad for life. It's bad for the planet, and will eventually exterminate the planet. So, now, if you want to disagree with that, you want to have a little argument about whether or not that's true, we can. I mean, the overwhelming majority of scientists seem to agree with that. But let's hear the argument. But it just kills me to sit here and listen to the other side claim that this is a political agenda. Now, I understand why they do that, because that skips past the messy part of where you have to actually argue the facts. And you can just dismiss it as politics, and everyone robotically goes, oh, yeah, it's politics, that's bad, we can't have that. But if we can have an actual discussion about this, if you believe, as the administration does, and as again, I don't know, 80% of the scientists believe, that climate change could destroy the frickin' planet, then it's worth saying that that's a national security threat, at least equivalent to China. Yes, there is the possibility of global nuclear war with China that could exterminate the planet. But climate change, the argument is, would exterminate the planet. So I think that's worth thinking about, all right? Please believe me when I say this is not a political agenda. It is a heartfelt belief that we have a distinct problem here that needs to be addressed. Second, how to address it. Come up with alternative sources of energy and make those investments. And this is also very important because even if this wasn't destroying the planet, our dependency upon oil has been problematic, all right? And I know there's this fantasy that we're going to become energy independent. Nobody's energy independent. Oil is a global marketplace. Even if we generate enough energy, we sell it overseas. And Saudi Arabia and OPEC, therefore, has an enormous amount of control over that market. And as I've said over and over again, the true answer to this problem is, when gas prices go up, wouldn't it be great to say, that's wonderful, but we don't need that. We have other sources of energy to go to. And nothing is more important in the military than energy and access to it, all right? Wars are started over having access to the energy that you need. So to say that this isn't involved in national security literally hurts my brain, all right? You need these alternatives. And the last argument is on this market. Well, let the market decide. The market subsidized the living hell out of the oil industry for 175 years. So they have an enormous advantage. The pipelines, the system, the entire thing that was built on our taxpayer dollars. So now what we're saying is if we're going to develop an alternative to that, then we're going to have to help that, as we help nuclear energy, a whole bunch of other different things. I don't think I hear the other side complaining about the government subsidizing nuclear energy, because that fits within their politics. So if I ask nothing else, could we please just have a rational discussion that understands that this is a legitimate policy issue? It isn't a fetish. It isn't a political debate. It's the fate of the planet and how we manage energy policy, both of which, and I'm going to take a real bold step here, actually impact national security. I believe that they do, and I believe that anybody would agree with that statement. So please, defeat this amendment. I reserve whatever time I have left.
Gentleman from Texas recognized.
Well, I appreciate my colleague for basically making the case for the very climate fetish that I described. When he talks about the need for energy and its existence for national security, my point is having reliable energy. We have to have energy that is available and reliable and dependable. That's the whole point. And my colleague talks about nuclear power. Great. I'm waiting with bated breath for my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to embrace and promote and push non-carbon producing nuclear power. We haven't generated a new nuclear power plant since when? What, the 1970s? Georgia isn't even off the ground because of federal regulation and interference. The fact is, we are subsidizing and promoting unreliable wind and solar while subsidizing the hell out of electronic vehicles, and my colleagues on the other side of the aisle want to use the Defense Department to continue to promote it, which is engaged in crony capitalism to enrich a small handful of elitists on the back of hardworking American people while we subsidize China and make ourselves reliable on China for their minerals and what they produce. It is absolutely astonishing that we would turn over our national defense capability to China at this point in time to pursue this radical agenda. I yield back.
The gentleman from Washington is recognized. You have 1 minute.
Thank you. I will just note that we are making investments in nuclear power. It's really expensive and it's difficult to develop, but the investments are being made. That is part of the agenda. And with that, I would yield the balance of my time to Mr. Garamendi.
The gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you. I'm actually quite amazed that we're allowing a political ideology to get in the way of reality and facts. The fact of the matter is that the U.S. military, more than a decade ago, noticed that the climate was changing and they needed to address it. Also, the fact is that the largest solar and wind energy systems in the nation are in Texas. And Texas is dependent upon those for their power when the heat wave arrives. Let's be smart here. Let's not let ideology and the fact that we want to get into a fight over climate change get in the way of good public policy. It's absolutely essential that the military build for the future, that they build for resiliency. And I'm out of time, so I yield back.
It's a quick minute. Time has expired. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Texas. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.